So Stephen had asked me before Christmas to prepare a sermon on Joseph, and my brain didn't really sort through there's a couple of different Josephs, and around Christmas time, you probably want to focus on the one that was Jesus's dad. No, so my mind went straight to this one. So I worked again and did another one on Jesus's dad, but I went back to the preparation I'd done here on Joseph, the son of Jacob, and figured, well, I'll give it another run. And really interesting because there's a couple of people in the book of Genesis that we have a lot of information on, right? Because this is early days. We're looking at the establishment of the people of God, and the people of God. When we use that phrase, we're generally talking about the nation of Israel. Sorry, there you go. So the nation of Israel, we're talking about the promise. Last week, talking about the promise that God made to Abraham, the covenant he made with Abraham. He says, I will make you a great nation, and I will bless all nations through you. So the covenant is with the nation of Israel, but the covenant is for all nations. So there is that two-sided conversation that's always going on. So, we've got Abraham, and the child of the promise, when God says to Abraham, I'm going to give you a child, it's not Ishmael, it's Isaac. They have to wait for God's timing because God's going to do what God's going to do. So there's Isaac, and Isaac grows up, gets married. He marries Rebecca. She gets pregnant. It's twins, and these particular twins are troublesome. They're born. Technical first one is Esau. So he's technically the firstborn, although Jacob was in by hand. And then as Esau and Jacob grow up, Jacob, well, he's mom's favorite. He's mom's boy. So when it comes time for the blessing in another couple of key events where he kind of swindles his brother out of some blessings for soup. Yeah. Don't know if that was a good trade, but Jacob ends up with all the blessings, and Esau misses out. And so Jacob, he then goes to look for a wife. Well, I don't know if his intention was to find one, but he heads out over to his uncle because, keeping it in the family was the thing. And so his cousin appeals to him, and so he says to his uncle, I'll have that one, thanks. And his uncle says, work 7 years. And he's like, cool, awesome. It's not too long, right? Yeah, now you talk to teenagers, it's 7 years, it's not bad. That's less than a medical degree, right? And so he does his 7 years, has a big party, gets a little well into the wine, the room's dark, wakes up in the morning, finds out he married the other sister. That's a bit of a shock. And his uncle says 7 more years for the next one. So now he's got 2 wives, and he starts having children. It is evident to all that one wife is favored above the others. So he really, really loves this one wife. She's not as great with the whole making babies thing, but the older sister, Leah, she cries out to the Lord, and she says, can you see me? Can you see this, God? I'm not loved. I've got nothing. And God blesses her with children. And we're given the boys. There's girls, but we're told about the boys. She has quite a few boys. And then her younger sister has, a boy. And then they start, saying, oh, well, why don't you take my servant on my behalf and we can have some more kids. It's kind of like a tally chart. Someone's keeping score. And so, comes to the point, we've got 12 boys, and only 2 of them are from the favored wife. We've got Joseph and Benjamin. And this is now a significant household. Numbers, wives, more children. People are living a really long time. There's a lot of time to make more people. So it's quite a community now when we meet Joseph. And now I've spent a really big chunk of time just getting up to the point of introducing who we're talking about. But the point of that is, it's not a standalone story. We can't take Joseph out of the lineage because we lose the significance of what happens in Joseph's story. All right? So if, once again, you've been raised in church, you're like, yeah, well, I know what happens in Joseph's story, and that's really cool, but not all of us have. So we're gonna talk a little bit about Joseph's story. So Joseph is the favored son. It is made evident to all of his brothers that he is the favorite son. And, that's often the symbol that we see of that is this multicolored cloak that his father makes for him. They're shepherds. Cloth is a big deal when you work in sheep. And dye is also a big deal. To get multiple colors, you have to have specialized things from lots of places. This is a financial investment. This is an effort investment. This is an expression of lavish love. And that's what Joseph has received, and that's what his brothers have not. Now, I don't know if any of you are part of a family, because you probably recognize some of the emotional context. What would it be like for the brothers who knew that their mother was not favored? As much as parents can try, we do not get to raise kids without impacting them with our own story. It is not possible to raise our kids without our stuff affecting their life. These boys know their mother is not favored. That's what they've grown up with. They know that a brother is favored over them. There is contention. There is push and pull. There is family. There is also drama and trauma. That's the context. This is not a two-dimensional story. These are people. They carry all the same messiness that we find in our own hearts and in the world around us. So it is into this context that Joseph has dreams. And he has these dreams, and he believes them. He says, I think these dreams are from God. And I think it could be argued that he doesn't pick the most tactful way to share his dreams with his brothers. He goes to them and says, "Oh, I had a dream." And the dream essentially says that I'm the best, and you will all bow to me. I'm a youngest sibling. I had older siblings who knew it all, and it really irked me anytime they thought they could tell me what was what. And that was, pretty tame compared to what had been going on in this particular family. So you've got all the past trauma. You've got all the layers of hurt and relationship and identity. And then you add on top of this proclamation from a self-righteous little punk. Says, well, guess what? God's going to raise me up and he's going to bow you down. And it's just like, yeah. You know what? People commit crimes for way less. Like, we're way past the inheritance money here. Like, this is just really rubbed it in. And then, so the brothers, the other brothers are sent out to the field to tend the sheep, and Joseph stays home. Is he capable? Can he watch the sheep? But he stays home. I don't know, mother's apron strings didn't reach that far, but, and then his father sends him out to go check on his brothers. And he goes out to check on his brothers. And they go, you know what? Dad's not here. No one's looking out for this guy now. We could just deal with this whole issue and level the family playing field. It would probably be better for the family dynamic if we just removed this element. We could all get along better. Maybe it would be better for our mothers if Joseph was gone. Maybe it's in the best interest of all of us if he just disappears. And so they stick him in a well. And what might begin as, all right, well, out of sight, out of mind. Different brothers have different plans of, oh, let's kill him. Let's just be done with it. Another brother is like, well, if I just keep my trap shut and these guys forget, I can get him out later and not get in trouble with Dad. And then another brother has a good idea. He says, well, we don't want him here, but we probably shouldn't kill him because that's a bit messed up. Let's just sell him. Here come traders. We can make a buck. He goes away. It's a good plan, That's a one-up on killing him, so must be a good choice. So they do. They sell him. And he's taken up to Egypt. Funnily enough, they don't actually think about what they're going to have to tell their dad until after they've sold him. And they're like, oh no. We've got to tell Dad something. And so, the idea of, well, if we kill a lamb and we take the blood and we rub it on this really precious cloak and we'll just be like, the wolves got him, Dad. Sorry. Okay. That's what they decide to do. And so Joseph is off to Egypt. He is a slave. He has no rights. He doesn't have citizenship. He has no other options for what he is going to do and no choice in the matter. He's purchased by Potiphar, and he is brought in to work in Potiphar's household. Now, one of the really significant things that I observed about Joseph in reading his story is this guy, he had incredible administrative gifts. And so he just does what his gifts are there for. And he runs Potiphar's household. He goes up through the ranks until he's kind of the top dog. He's overseeing the household. He is the kind of the top servant, and he's got quite a bit of power and authority in that context. He does not have power and authority over Potiphar's wife. And in this situation where he does not have power, and she does, it's kind of within her theoretical rights to ask him to do whatever that she would want him to do. And he's really not okay with that. And when she tries to make him come to bed with her, he flees. But he's just broken a very strong power dynamic. And he would know that he was in trouble. So she, having the power, says, it was him. He tried to come on to me. Get rid of him. What's Potiphar going to do? He gets rid of him, sends him to prison. And there's Joseph in prison. And what does Joseph do? He uses his gifts of administration. And he starts to help out with the prison until he's pretty much running the place. He is overseeing a lot of stuff that's going on in the prison. And this is the point where dreams come back again, but they're not his. He's in prison and he hears from the royal baker and the royal wine taster. And they each have dreams. And he asks the Lord the meaning of the dreams. And God tells him. And he shares that with these men. And one returns to their position of honor, of rank, of power. The other is executed, just as God told Joseph would happen. So Joseph continues in the prison until Pharaoh has a dream. And he continues to have dreams, and they disturb him. And it takes quite a while for the man who was returned to his position to remember, oh yeah, I had a dream. And there was someone who told me what it meant. So he shares that with Pharaoh. Pharaoh calls in Joseph, and he shares his dream. And his dream is disturbing, very disturbing. Fat cows eating happily on the side of the river, and then they are eaten by skinny cows. Yeah, nightmares. That's something you don't want repeated. Joseph asked the Lord for the interpretation of the dreams. And he listens to God. And he shares the interpretations of the dreams with Pharaoh. Now, we here in Australia have, part of our culture is something that we call a low power dynamic. We enjoy relationships across different power levels at a fairly low distance. So, we give our pastors a hard time. Even though they're in a position of authority, we like to hackle them a little bit. We've got really fun nicknames for our politicians, which I completely approve of. We don't have this, my lord, kind of power distinction that would have been in place. So Joseph, he had the option of saying something that would just make Pharaoh happy. He could have presented things in such a way to save his own neck. But what does he do? He speaks what God told him. He says what God says. And Pharaoh says, all right. So there's going to be 7 years of bumper crops. We're going to have all the food that we need. There's going to be 7 years following that of absolutely nothing and famine. And if we don't prepare, we will die. And so Pharaoh asks Joseph, what do we do about it? Not just like that, because he's, high power distance. I'm sure it was very, very proper. And Joseph uses his gifts of administration to say, well, how about we store up all the extra, everything we can during the bumper crop years, and then there will be food during the famine. And, Pharaoh is impressed. That makes a lot of sense. He puts Joseph in charge of it. Now, I'm sure he, found out a thing or two about Joseph at that point. You don't tend to just pick a random. He probably was like, well, where have you been? What's that been like there? Maybe he talked to the person who was in charge of the prison. Maybe even talked to Potiphar. Who knows? Doesn't tell us. We don't know. But he puts Joseph in charge of all of this. So Joseph has gone from the favored son and the least favorite brother to a slave, to a prisoner, and now he is, pretty much next under Pharaoh. He's in charge of the food, and that's a big deal. So what God says is true. There are years of crops and so much lushness, and then come the years of famine. But what Joseph has done works. It works. The people of Egypt have food to eat, and word spreads throughout the land. The people of Egypt have food. Everyone else is starving. And it comes to Joseph's brothers, his father's household, that there is food in Egypt. And so they set out. Take what you can, go buy food. And they get there, and their only intention is really to save their family. They rock up, and there's Joseph, who's the one in charge, who's probably looking nothing like the brother that they knew. And they bow before him. Remember, big power distance. That's the appropriate response, especially when someone has the power to save you and your family. They bow before him. And there's that first moment of, there's that dream. He's lifted up, his brothers bow down. And Joseph, knowing exactly who they are, goes on to try and figure out, have they changed at all? Are they exactly the same? What would they do to me if they knew I was me? And so he sets out some tests for them. He sends them away with some and says, you got to bring back, your youngest brother. Is there another one? He wants to see his brother, Benjamin. He says, okay, well, give you a little bit, but you got to bring the kid back. And they do. And then he's like, well, okay, so Benjamin's all right. That's good. This time, I'll give you the grain. But he hides treasure in Benjamin's bag. and then orchestrates to have that discovered as they're leaving. And he says, oh, no, he's stealing. We're going to keep him. We're going to throw him into prison. It's like, well, that's kind of what they did to him. He's kind of given them the opportunity to see if they're still in that same place of, well, Dad's not here, so we could just get rid of him. But they don't. They say, no, take one of us instead, not the brother. It would kill our father to lose another of his favorite sons. And through all this, he comes to the place where he reveals himself, who he is. And he's a very emotional guy. And you can kind of see why he would be. There's kind of a lot going on. He weeps. He breaks down and he weeps and he says, it's me. It's Joseph. And this is where we come to sort of the key phrase that we probably hear most from this story. And that is, what man meant for evil, God has used for good. And that often is the place that we tend to get a little bit stuck. Is it very true? Yes, absolutely. Through the darkness, through evil happenings, through hurt, through trauma, God is working out a story that is good. It is kind of tempting as Christians to use these things and apply them in every situation. And it has been the temptation of Christian communities to say, well, this is the reason why if we are in dangerous situations or if we are in unsafe relationships, we should stay because God might bring good. But that's actually not what this is about. This is about the fact that God is the author and he is in the midst of it. It's not a should phrase. It's a God phrase. And God, being the author and writer, doesn't just start here. It was listening to God that took Joseph and Jacob on the journey that they've been on. It was the presence of God, the belief in God being who he says he is and doing what he says he will do. So that's what this call is for. It's not you should stay because God will make it good. It's a follow God. Follow him, seek him, trust God. So the story kind of wraps up with people being well fed and the brothers bringing back their father and their whole household and settling in Egypt and not dying in a famine. That's pretty significant. There's that thing of God preserving, God bringing out to preserve, God preparing ahead to restore, God making a path to save. So, Joseph, a giant of the faith. So what was so great about Joseph? He listened when God spoke. Maybe didn't always have the right approach to processing that information. And he acted within his own capacity, with the gifts he had in the way that he was able when God provided the opportunity. Other than that, he didn't have superhuman strength. He didn't have a bat cave with all kinds of toys. There was nothing outside of that was exceptional about Joseph. He also came with a lot of baggage. And this story, you look at it in the big picture, and you see this repetition of really, we get to look back so we can judge, although let's not look too closely at our lives or else that'll mess up our ability to judge. Really, really messed up choices. Hearing last week about the whole, Abraham's like, oh, well, yeah, no, that's not my wife, that's my sister. And it goes badly. And then he does it again. And then do you know that, I think it's his son that does it also? Yeah, the whole no, that's not my wife, that's my sister. Where are they getting the idea that this is a good choice? No, but they're doing it. They're repeating their family patterns because they're human. We live in this same story. We are also human. We repeat our family patterns. There are patterns of dishonesty, tricking, pulling the wool over. There's patterns of incomplete forgiveness, of kind of starting the forgiveness process but not completing it, where Jacob says, oh, well, be reconciled to Esau, but he doesn't really believe that they're going to be reconciled. So he's very cautious about that. There is where Joseph, having already said to his brothers, I forgive you, it's done. His dad dies, and they come back to him and they go, Dad said before he died, we were all there, that you have to be nice to us and you can't get your payback now. They didn't believe that he'd actually forgiven them. They were carrying that on. They were carrying on the sentiment towards their father, these brothers, of being lesser than, trying to get in and take what they feel they had been cheated out of. Continuing on is the preferring over younger brothers over older brothers. These family systems continue. And we've got Joseph, who is a giant of the faith. And he has interrupted some of these systems, right? Because he has chosen to forgive instead of holding on to the grudge. He was in a position of power where he could easily have chosen very differently, and it would have been completely acceptable, probably even to us, to look at that and be like, kind of deserved it. Like, why would you look to completely restore relationship? Is that safe? I don't know. We're not given the whole conversation. But we do see Joseph making choices, restorative choices. But we don't end with this really pretty picture. We don't end with this ideal family who've all dealt with their trauma. They've all dealt with their issues. They're not going to mess up the next generation, because you turn a page and there we go. They're going to mess up the next generation. So God is writing his story. We've already established that Joseph is not chosen. He's not walking this path because he is exceptional. He is walking this path because God is exceptional, because God is writing the stories. And his participation is listening, obeying, trusting that God will do what God says he will do. And I think it can be easy, especially looking back, to say, well, you know what? It was all tidy. It was the tidiness of life that made room for God. God can't really do that sort of stuff with a really messy life. A messy life where relationships are broken, where family trauma repeats itself, where choices are handed down from generation to generation that leave pain and suffering in their wake. We can look at the world around us and be maybe even the world immediately surrounding us when we have to deal with our own family issues. And we all do, because we're raised by humans. We are humans. We're surrounded by humans. And we go, God, this is really messy. I'm not tidy enough. This isn't tidy enough. My family is not tidy enough. You look at the holidays. Is there disconnection? Is there broken relationship? Is there that one topic that you do not bring up in the household over the celebratory dinner table because you know you're just going to kick off a battle? But that is exactly where God works. That is exactly where he is present. When we make really bad choices, when there are bad choices that are made that we can't control, that affect us, That is where God is. Joseph at the bottom of the well. His brothers, pretty happy for him to just not exist anymore. That's a low point. God is in the midst of that family. That's still what God's working with. Joseph on the proverbial throne of Egypt, with his brothers bowing at his feet, sitting around the banquet table, living in luxury and plenty. God is here. That's kind of a pretty big season change. That's a pretty big emotional journey. God's presence doesn't change. Just like he does with every generation with his people, he's actually reiterated his covenant through action. Joseph, taken out, set aside, used to provide salvation for the people that God has chosen. And, not coincidentally, all of Egypt. He's also saved all of Egypt from famine, because it's not just the covenant of God's people, it's the covenant for all nations. And I think one of the things that we really want to be able to come away with is this understanding that everything is part of a whole. There actually isn't a full stop separation in who God is between that time and us. Has God's plan progressed? Yes. Out of this messed up family of really human humans, God has brought his son and provided that eternal path to salvation. Not just saving us from famine, but saving us from being totally disconnected with the God that we were made to love. And he has not only told us once who he is as our Savior, as our path maker, but he has repeated it over and over as he calls Abraham out to create a new nation, as he makes him a covenant to bless all nations through him, as through Isaac, asking Abraham to sacrifice his son, but then providing a replacement. Through the working of the building of the family of Jacob, through Joseph going out, providing a pathway to salvation. Again, and if you've ever read the book of Judges, yeah, it's essentially the same. This is the same story of God's people are cared for by God. God's people get into trouble. God's people get into real trouble. They call out to God, and God rescues them. He brings someone to bring them back onto the path. Again and again and again, God's story is, hey, I've got you. We are the unfaithful humanity. We are the unfaithful. But God's faithfulness is enough for both of us. We don't have faith by having faith in ourselves. Our faith is not to say, I've got this because God's on my side. Our faith is, God, your faithfulness is enough. And the story ends, not the big story, the little story. The Joseph story ends with Joseph dying. And the last thing he does is he makes arrangements for his bones to be carried with the people when they go to the promised land, because he believes that God will do what God said he will do. So even in his death, even though he has lived this really crazy story, he says God will do what God says he will do. So when, not if, when God takes you, his people, to that promised land, I'm coming too. I will be there, just a little less of me. And I think sometimes we have an idea that we have to be something incredible to walk God's path, to walk what he lays out in front of us. We don't. Actually, thinking that we're something really incredible will probably make it a lot harder for us to hear and be willing to obey when God speaks to us. He uses people. He knows us. He knows us. He knows everything. And he calls us to himself. He says, "You're messy. I love you. Come, let me write a story with you." So I'm definitely not from the tradition of having a memorized benediction. But I wanted us to take a moment and think about this concept of the open hands that Joseph had to the Lord. He listened. He was open to hear, open to change. He had his gifts, what God had given him the ability to do. So let's sit with those two things in our hands, open before the Lord, if you're ready. If you're not ready to do that with God, don't do it yet. Maybe explore that. What's holding you back? And let's pray a really simple prayer together. God, this is your story. And you know us. And you love us. Lord, you love the nations. Thank you for the pathway that you have made for us to come and be restored to you. May we be open to be changed by you, to hear you. May we be open to offer you what we have, not in perfection, but just in what you've already given us. Let us see your way above our own.